He just called me out. And I wasn't ready to answer that question. So I began, though, to really dig in even more and more. As I began my journey towards Catholicism even more, I still had to do all the things I was doing as a pastor, and Advent was coming up that year. And the first week was when the priest Zechariah got the news, and we talked about how he got the news that John the Baptist was coming. That was week 1. And as week 2 approached, I was getting ready to preach a sermon on the Annunciation, when the Blessed Mother receives the news from the angel Gabriel. Back in the Protestant world, we just called that Luke chapter 1. And I'm in my office preparing this message. And as I'm reading this text, which I'd read tons of times before, which I'd preached through dozens of times before, something happened. And as I read the text, whenever I would read about the Virgin Mary, I just began to weep. And I felt this presence like I could never explain right there with me in my office. And I didn't understand what was happening to me. And I didn't get it, but I knew that I had to just follow this. So I wrote this incredible sermon about the Blessed Virgin Mary receiving the news from the angel Gabriel. And when it came time for me to preach this sermon to my Protestant congregation, the sermon was all about how the Blessed Virgin Mary was the new Eve, the new Ark of the Covenant, the woman of Revelation 12. I talked all about how she was full of grace. And I talked about how the angel Gabriel humbles himself before her. The week before, he didn't humble himself before Zechariah, who was this priest, but when he comes and meets this precious, young, humble virgin, he humbles himself. I never had felt the Holy Spirit on me preaching a sermon like I had that day. And you might think people would be like, oh, what is Keith doing? He's preaching all this Catholic stuff. They didn't think that at all. They were weeping too. As I looked out into the audience that day in the congregation, people had tears streaming down their faces. One man even came up to the front after the end, fell to his knees and began to pray. And I was like, there is something powerful here. And I didn't understand what it was. That week I met with one of my Catholic friends and I told him what had happened, how I think I'm falling in love with the Blessed Virgin Mary. There's something happening here. And I preached this sermon. The Holy Spirit's power came upon me and he just lost it too. He said, Keith, you need to follow this. I said goodbye to all these people that I cared about. Our church was getting ready to build a $10 million new megaplex on the edge of town. We'd worked so hard, but I was on a different journey. And I knew that I had to give all that up to follow Jesus into his church. My last Sunday there was the day that we put shovels in the ground to break ground. The following Sunday, I had gone from the newest church in town to the oldest church in town. And as I was meeting with my priest weekly on this process to become Catholic, I remember we had been meeting for a few months and God was showing me some amazing things. And I'd gotten to this point where it didn't matter to me what I was going to be giving up because I was so excited about what I was going to be receiving. And he said to me, Keith, I think you're ready. When do you want to do this? And we picked the day, this random day on the calendar of October 8th, 2017. There was no rhyme or reason behind that day. It's just the day that we picked. So as that day